We're so excited to have all of you on the line today, and to all of our fellows who are going to speak on the panel. Thank you very much, but we do hope to hear from everybody during this call today. And so this is our Issues of Our Times event, and it seemed like we couldn't think of a more on-point topic to discuss for this Issues of Our Times event. So we're really excited and want to welcome everybody. I'm just going to go through and share with you who the fellows are on the panel today, and Rodney will be presenting a little bit more of an introduction when he speaks to everybody. But we have Morgan today from the University of Virginia School of Law, who is working this summer at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. Mercedes from the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law, who's at the Public Justice Center this summer. Brenda, also from the Catholic University, who's at the Children's Law Center. Ian from Case Western Reserve. I love that you're waving. I'm focused on looking in the camera and I was like, wait, I can see you waving in the corner. Ian from Case Western Reserve University School of Law, who's at the Attorney General's Office in the Labor and Personnel Division. And Jerona Hawkins from Howard University School of Law, who's at the American Civil Liberties Union of California. So those are our exciting panelists for today. And then we also have Rodney on the line, who is going to kind of facilitate the panel today, and we're very excited for that. And then John, who you all know, and will be doing an introduction right after me. So luckily, Barbara went through all of the housekeeping things, so I don't need to do that. So thanks to Barbara, we're being recorded, and about the mute and all of those different things. So I'm gonna turn it over to John to give everybody a warm welcome, and then we'll go to Rodney, who will do a little introduction and then facilitate our panel members for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're hoping to turn it over to some interactive Q&As from everybody in conversation. And just so you all know, on the call, we have invited all of the fellows from this year's class, and then there's myself, John, Rodney, and some other members that you know from the foundation. And so we just wanted everyone to kind of know who was on the call so we could all be aware and feel comfortable. So we're excited for today's event. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. A couple of days ago, we had a very rousing conference call among those who are on the panel and preparing for this conversation. And I expect today to be the same, both enjoyable, but very, very provocative. We've called it a conversation, and that's what we want it to be. We want it to be a spirited conversation, a dialogue, an exchange among the fellows about addressing racial injustice and systemic racism. James Baldwin once wrote that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so a good part of facing, which is what we're doing today, is hearing exchanges from you and among all of you, listening and hearing from all as you share your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, both from the head and from the heart. And so we look very much eagerly to this conversation, this dialogue. And thank you, everybody who's on the panel, and thank you, everybody, all the other fellows who will be participating in joining us. And it's now my pleasure to turn it over to our board's chairman, Rodney Slater, a great friend and a very warm host. Rodney?
Thank you, John. And to all of our fellows, I think all of you know that the foundation has been doing its work now for 20 years. You're actually this special class of fellows for us. And we were going to celebrate this 20th year in different ways. But this COVID crisis and other matters have interceded, and we are where we are. But that doesn't have to be a bad place at all, because it really affords us an opportunity to think anew about the way we interact one with another, how we interact with opportunities that are presented to us. And with this sort of wave of righteous social protest that has resulted over the last month or so, clearly in response to a number of just tragic situations in society. George Floyd being really but clearly a very significant and gripping and engaging one when it comes to, again, the way that the nation has responded and the way that the world has responded in many respects. And so what we'd like to do with you today in this Issues of Our Time program that we're having, and a conversation with you, quite unlike all of the other Issues of Our Time programs that we've had in the past. We've had distinguished leaders from a number of vantage points, if you will, but never our fellows. And we are, frankly, wanting to lift your voices with this Issues of Our Time program, much like the voices of young professionals and young adults and youth are really the most powerful of voices in this moment in our nation's history. And also, again, when you think about the world, in the world's history as well. And so we think that there is a lot that you can say to us. We're also very happy that the leadership of our firm has responded to this moment as well, where we are talking about the values that we hope to embody as a firm, and work that we're doing in states like Georgia and New York. Georgia with its hate crime legislation that we were supportive of, New York with the work with Governor Cuomo and dealing with their civil rights law that relates to a provision that really conceals some of the records of police officers that have been engaged in questionable activities. We are involved in that effort as well. A lot of our pro bono activities. And then the firm has actually, individuals have challenged us as a firm to use our premier public policy practice to really engage in a way that can influence legislation that is being considered in the Congress and in other legislatures around the country. So this is something that has affected us as well, and we as well are trying to respond. But again, the focus today is on you. Those comments were just to offer some insights about your relationship with the firm through this fellowship program that hopefully you're proud of, we're proud of, and through your efforts, it allows us, through the funding of the foundation, to really touch organizations and communities in ways that are very, very critical and that were a part of our vision 20 years ago when the foundation was established. With that, let me, if I may, just come to you individually, since you've heard us a bit talk about what the objective is here. And maybe I'll start with you, Morgan. As you think about the objective for the conversation that we have talked about and your work with the U.S. Attorney's Office, just say a little bit, if you will, to give us a little thinking, a little appreciation for your own thinking about this experience and where you would like the conversation to go as well. So let me just start with you, and then I'm going to tell you that Mercedes, I'm going to come to you next. So just know that I'm coming to you. But Morgan?
I think on my end, well, first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to have a conversation about what's been going on in our country for so long and what in the racial injustice that continues to persist. And I think coming at it from the vantage point of working for a federal prosecutor's office, trying to see how, I think we can come at this conversation from a lot of different vantage points. And for me, coming at it from what can the government be doing to, try to work to make the situation better. I'm working in the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia. And so, for example, they are working on trying a case where a man threatened to blow up a Black church. So we can look at it from the vantage point of social activism, we can look at it from the point of legislation, we can look at it from the point of prosecution. And I think a valuable part of this conversation could be talking about where do we go from here, and how do we, what kind of changes can we see, and what changes can we work towards to make sure that things do progress as we go into the future. Because in my opinion, personally, I think it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of different vantage points in a lot of different areas of our country. So I would love to hear our conversation kind of go there in different arenas where we can see work in progress to make the future better.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. And know that we appreciate you as well and your voice. And so, Mercedes, now I'll come to you.
I want to echo that. Thanks for the opportunity to have this dialogue. As Secretary Slater mentioned, I'm currently working at the Public Justice Center here in Baltimore that seeks to pursue systematic change to build a just society. And it really looks at issues of social justice, economic and race inequity, and human rights to help people who are struggling to provide for their basic needs. And so as somebody who lived in Baltimore previously for 9 years and is now coming back to the city, having such a strong love for this city, it really inspires me on a day-to-day basis to work with an organization that is working both at the grassroots level and through advocacy at the state level to address racial inequity through kind of day-to-day issues that we all need as human beings to have normal lives. So there's a human right to housing program that protects tenants' right to housing, a workplace justice program that supports equal rights within the workplace, as well as addressing education and healthcare benefits, and the right to counsel as well in civil rights cases. So it's really inspiring to be able to work with an organization that is continuing to address racial inequity throughout all of its work.
Very good. Thanks, Mercedes. And clearly with Morgan and Mercedes, you can see how we're basically, with just the two of them, coming at these questions from very interesting vantage points. And it's important to have both of those voices involved, but also the others that we're going to hear from as well. And so, Brenda, I'd like to come to you now, and then Ian, I want you to stand at the ready. Brenda? Now you'll need to unmute.
That is helpful, thank you.
Very good.
Again, everyone, my name is Brenda Kills, and I'm a rising 3L at the Catholic University Columbus School of Law in Washington, D.C. I'm also a law clerk at the Children's Law Center in Washington, D.C. And I'd like to say thank you to the firm and the fellowship for allowing us to have this space, a safe space and a comfortable space to talk and engage. The Children's Law Center represents and advocates for children who are don't have a lot of representation, and unfortunately that includes a lot of Black and brown children, and that in itself is a movement. They've done things such as healing circles for both Black and non-Black people, and when that happened, it just shocked me almost, because I never thought about the experience of someone else other than those people who it directly affects in regards to police brutality, of how they felt about the situation. I know that there are many praying hands and many protesters and many people that are out there with us, but I never got an opportunity to actually hear what that meant or what that felt like from people on the outside looking in. And today I'm really excited for that opportunity to get to see what everyone is feeling, because we do have a diverse panel here.
Very good. Thanks, Brenda. Ian?
Thank you, Secretary Slater. Great honor to speak as a panel today. And briefly, I actually work for the Attorney General's office in the state of Washington. And Washington is one of the states that is very progressive. And a couple of days after George Floyd incident happened, our Attorney General, Bob Ferguson, issued a statement. It's the main point of the station is he wants to issue a legislation that kind of ensures and collect all the instances of deadly force used by the law enforcement to increase transparency. And also he has a plan to make a hate crime like work group or task force within the AG or within the state government agency, so that it could actually improve tackling systemic racism that is within the government agency. And also, as a law clerk who's working in the Labor and Personnel Division, our division is fighting hard to ensure equal opportunity in jobs regardless of gender, race, sex, national origin. So as a person who wants to dedicate and work as a government official later on throughout the career, I mean, I really hope to hear some of other voices from fellow law clerks and some of our panels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. And clearly we know that you want to work on employment issues as relates to Asian Americans, and that's very important work. And Brenda, I thought it was very interesting that you talked about a safe space. You should know that even as a law firm, we have done the same thing for our own colleagues. And we probably had one of the most moving and touching and emotional expressions that we've ever had as a firm. And I think it clearly, it strengthens the relationships among the family members of the firm, and it makes us better and clearly much more sensitive as we go forward. So I thought about that when you made that point. So thank you to Brenda and Ian. Jaron, I'd like to come to you now. Number one, you actually traveled to California for your fellowship before the pandemic really sort of set in upon us. But from LA now, let us hear a little bit about just some of your experiences and thoughts about the discussion that we're engaged in, and the contribution that that you know that you can make. And please mute.
Unmute.
Unmute, I'm sorry, unmute. Oh, I don't know that Jaron can hear. Can you hear us?
Okay, I'm trying to unmute him.
Okay.
Okay, he is not unmuting.
Okay.
Jaron, can you unmute from your side, because I don't have that control? Or Janet, can you unmute? Janet, are you able to unmute? No, okay, whoops. Okay, just to do a little test, it looks like a lot of you went muted just now. Can any of you unmute? Let me see on my screen if that.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
okay, so it's not a universal problem. Okay, I really apologize for that.
So why don't we do this?
Yeah.
Maybe we can reach out to Jaron, and maybe he can call in. I've had that experience before, where you just call in on a number as a possibility.
Okay.
But let's go back and maybe touch on some of the points that we've mentioned. It's interesting how all of you are talking about being involved in really substantive work this summer. And let me start again with you, maybe Morgan, and then I'll come, Mercedes, to you next. But is the experience that you're having, does it take on maybe not a new meaning, but more intense, the meaning and understanding of the work with the pandemic and with the racial unrest as sort of the backdrop? Maybe your insights about that, meaning what you were expecting and what you're actually experiencing. And we'll hear from you first, Morgan, and then Mercedes will come to you.
Sure, thank you. So again, just as a reminder, I've been working at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. And I'm very happy to say that a lot of my work has been substantive. And, I was worried, maybe going into a more virtual experience that, that might not be the case, but it really has been. And in terms of the racial injustice that we're seeing in our country today, I think it really just informs, it kind of gives me a larger perspective. Like, for example, I've been working on looking into different issues about police powers and, you know, what different ways that police can interact with possible defendants before and after they make arrests. And so I think that really, as I go into looking into these questions, it gives me personal questions, or just kind of reminds me to look at it on a larger scale. So I might be looking at a specific fact pattern and answering a question for my supervisor, but then on the other hand, like, where could this question play into in a different fact pattern that has to do more with you know, someone being targeted for their race, and how would that fact pattern then impact that question? And so, because this is such a real problem today, this is something that I find, as someone who wants to try to become a federal prosecutor for civil rights issues, this is a great learning experience for me, because it's allowing me to start asking those questions now and start maybe forming answers to them before I would even have to do so as an attorney. And so it's been really valuable.
Very good. Thank you.
Rodney, I'm sorry to interrupt for 1 minute, but it looks like Jerron is unmuted and back with us.
Okay.
I apologize. The moment you called my name, Secretary Slater, it like froze and it started going slow. But with that being said, hey everyone, my name is Jerron Hawkins. I'm a rising 2L at the Howard University School of Law, also located in Washington, D.C. This summer, well, first of all, let me thank you, to Secretary Slater for hosting this event, Squire Patton Boggs Foundation. Huge shout out to my mentor, Rick, as well. He has been really helpful this summer. I have the honor of being a part of the Southern California's ACLU Education Equity Team in their Los Angeles office. Currently, we've been working on a lot of paperwork and legislation policy regarding defunding the police, which is pretty interesting. From my personal experience, I'm a first generation high school grad, college grad, and law school student. So my approach to education has always been, education provides access and open doors to opportunity. But the aspect that the ACLU's Education Equity Team has been approaching education has been very interesting. It's been a more economic approach. They do a lot of lawsuits pertaining to defunding certain school districts, depending on whether or not the district is misusing funds. And currently we're doing work defunding school resource officers within the school district. So it's not my usual line of work. I usually try to do a lot of policy work, but this has been pretty cool. I really enjoyed this part of the fight. And I'm, as everyone else said, I'm just interested to hear from, everyone else and what they're doing this summer, and, how we can build off each other and, all aid in the movement.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jerron, and thank you for mentioning Rick Talisman as well, your mentor. Rick is one of the leaders of our firm, and I know he's on the call with us today as well, and I know you two are working very closely together. So, and we know that all of you have mentors, and the same holds true. But let me come back then, Mercedes, maybe again, just the work experience that you're having and how you think the pandemic and the social unrest or the righteous social protest, that's a way to talk about it as well, how that might have affected the experience you're having in a positive or a not so positive way, just whatever is the case with you.
Sure. So I think I'll start with how the pandemic has impacted my work. I think when there is an emergency or a difficult event like the pandemic, it hits vulnerable communities especially hard. So right away, I had the opportunity to start to summarize the Family First Coronavirus Response Act to help educate folks on what paid sick leave might look like and how the federal law relates to state law, because it is very, very confusing to understand what people can actually take off and under what circumstances, and whether they're sick themselves or whether they're caring for a sick family member. I've also been working on some workers' rights cases to help advocate for folks that might be misclassified as private contractors and not eligible for government benefits when really they're employees. I think though the housing work that I've done to support the Public Justice Center is particularly related to the response to the pandemic. Because of the moratorium on evictions, there are unfortunately instances where landlords are finding different ways to evict folks. So we're really trying to do the best that we can in this period when the courts are closed to protect the housing rights of individuals. So I'm really learning a lot through that. In regards to the protests in the street, a lot of the protests to date in Baltimore have been largely peaceful. So I've been very grateful to have the opportunity through the organization's race equity team to learn more about the organization's both external and internal focus on educating staff on race equity. And this has been a focus of the organization for many, many years to really bring the organization together to support racial equity through a variety of educational and participatory opportunities.
Okay, very good, very good. Thanks, Morgan, Mercedes. You know, it's interesting, and I'm going to pivot as I come to Brenda and Ian and Jaron. But it's interesting as we listen to you talk about how engaged you are in really meaty issues. I mean, issues that really go directly to the livelihood of people and your students. Your students. I mean, that's fascinating, and a program that allows you to do that. It reminded me of, and I'm going to mention this quote, but I'm going to come to the Baldwin quote to kind of maybe round out our discussion and invite some of our fellow colleagues and fellows to come on into the discussion. But as I kept hearing you talk about how you were dealing with questions of the justice system or housing or just the plethora of issues, it reminded me of this quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., the great jurist, who said that as life is action and passion, we must be engaged in the action and passion of our times or be judged by future generations never to have lived. That's sort of paraphrasing it, but that's the essence of it. And when you think about your age and your experience really getting into those kinds of issues on the part of those without a voice or those who are caught up in the criminal justice system, I mean, it's really impactful. I just want to underscore that. And I think it's fascinating. And so let me maybe close that part of it and then come to what John really put to us in the beginning. And I wanted to sort of work up to this because I think this is quite a quote from Baldwin, but it's not easy to let's see, not everything that is faced can be changed, okay? Sometimes, you know, it's just insurmountable. I mean, that's what the word means, and that's sometimes what the reality is, that you can see it and you can want to engage in it and to engage in it, but it just can't be changed. But we do know this, that unless it is faced, there is no way that it can be changed. And I think more so with the racial unrest, we're really coming to grapple with that question. And this is a question that is as old as the nation, and really even older. And so with that in mind, let me come to you, Brenda, and then Ian, you know I'm coming to you next, and then Jaron, I'll end up with you, and then we'll open it up. But let me just ask, what are your thoughts when you think about that quote and you think about this moment? And all I would say is, remember, as you noted earlier, Brenda, you are in a safe space.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Secretary Slater. I would meet that quote with another quote, actually my favorite quote. And when you said it, it came to my mind. If there is no struggle, there can be no progress. So and that's Frederick Douglass, if everyone thinks about a car, we need 4 wheels to make the car go. We need it to get up the street. if we only have 3 wheels, we're only going to get but so far. So what that means to me is that we need everyone on board. An example of this, and because this is a safe space, dig a little bit into my experience at Catholic as a law student there. I went to historically Black colleges for most of my career, and also I went to a high school that was predominantly Black. So this is one of my first experience going to a more diverse school. When I went there, I had extreme imposter syndrome. I was going through a lot, even within my community, because we all have different experiences. And I think that in order for things to get better, we all have to understand that even though we're so different, we're so alike at the same time. So what that means is looking at ourselves, checking our biases, looking at our privileges and sharing those privileges that aren't extended to other people. And you may think, hey, I don't have a privilege. I'm a Black woman. Malcolm X said to be a Black woman is the lowest of the low. You face the most discrimination and you're targeted and you're treated terrible for it. But even in that, I found privilege. Going back to my law school experience when I first went there and I had imposter syndrome, it was hard. Even the references that were made in class, I didn't watch half of the shows that they talked about. That didn't extend to my community. I didn't know about the books that they read. I had my own books that I would read in my community that I could reference. So it was hard just even getting the material. However, someone gifted me with a tutor. And because I had that tutor, I now had privilege. And so what I did with that is that I shared that privilege with other students who I saw that were struggling, who may have not had access to parents or friends or, just experience to see what it means to be in law school or stand up against a curve, which we could talk about that if y'all want, But that would be my answer, Secretary Slater. We have to look and use the privilege that we had and extend it. And that means whether you're going to work somewhere after law school, I don't know everyone if you're working now, if you see a person that is underrepresented or that cannot access what you access in order to get where you are, share that with them, hire them, mentor them, help them. And that would be my answer.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And if I may, Brenda, Ian, just before coming to you, the imposter syndrome issue, I'm sure you've read Du Bois's The Two-ness.
Okay.
Yes, and how you feel you are as you are, but then how you sometimes, when engaging with the broader society, you're dealing with how you might be perceived. Yes,
it's the whole mentality of double consciousness, and we are still focusing on this concept of what Du Bois described as the double consciousness, you all know, and then intertwining it with the new Negro, so to speak, and I'm using his words, so everybody, I'm using his words. And with that, it comes a time, and I wanted to share this later, I didn't want to take it away from anybody else, but as a woman who wants to advocate for people who are underrepresented, and I experience or I see somebody around me who is experiencing discrimination because of something that they're born with that they can't change, I feel helpless. I feel like, what am I supposed to do? Here I am separate in my community because, I made it. I went to college and then I went to law school and, I'm striving and I'm looked at a certain way. And then you look at me and you think I have the answers, but I don't have the answers. And then I go out into the world, but I'm still seen as everyone else is seen in my community. So that's the theory of the double consciousness. And that was also included in my analogy of the 3 wheels. We all have to come together and see, you have the same amount of air pressure that I have so that we can get to where we need to go.
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, Ian, let me just come to you. And again, your work, the work that you aspire to do is not too different from what Brenda is talking about. You want to be a voice for sometimes those who are voiceless as well. And let me just ask you to give your own insight about that, thinking about the Baldwin quote, but clearly others. You can see Brenda had her own that she shared with us as well. So feel free, because this is probing. This is designed to, frankly, let us see more of you. And clearly all that we've seen thus far, we've applauded because we wanted you to be a part of our fellowship, this community. So this is just to get a little bit more of that, if we can.
Yeah, and so just basically my thoughts, I mean, it's similar to Branda's, but instead of like hardly advocating for a certain underrepresented racial group, I just think equality is the most important part. Like we should, if we advocated for a certain underrepresented group, I mean, that they are underrepresented, so they need our help. So it is important for us to advocate. But if we turn the table around, you know, that could also be another form of discrimination, and it's not being equal to the other side as well. So as a person who wanted to practice employment law, like I actually wanted to focus on like giving equal opportunity to everyone who is competent without being, you know, segregated or discriminated by their national origin or sexual identity, gender, or race. So I just think that's my focus basically. And throughout my like personal lives, my dad was a diplomat, so I had the chance to travel a lot of different countries, meet like different people and stuff. And I think these like racisms comes from misunderstanding, because we have like certain cultural differences, national differences, and we can cope that through like understanding each other. But I think it always comes to misunderstanding, because when I first came to America, people called me FOB. So FOB basically means fresh off the boat. So it's basically mocking like immigrants and saying, oh, you just came off the boat, so you don't know anything about American cultures and that. And I get that, but eventually I became friends with all of them. But like initially, just because I'm different and just because we didn't understand each other, that kind of racism just pops up. So I just think if we could just focus more on understanding each other, then I think that's also, it could be a possible way to kind of cope with systemic racism. Mm-hmm. That's my thought. Thanks.
Okay. No. Very good. Ian, thank you. You know, Ian, I thought about when you just underscored the balancing act of a lawyer, just that balancing act, this person's rights as relates to this person's rights, right? And it reminded me of another individual, a lawyer, and I'm sure Jaron will know this name. It's Charles Hamilton Houston. And he talked about the work of the lawyer being that of reconciling the wants and desires of all individuals, each equally entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's what I could hear in your comments about that tension. Those are the scales. That's the balance. And well stated. Jaron, let me come to you if I can. And you've heard the question as presented. You've listened to both Ian and Brenda. Your thoughts?
Okay. Just so I won't go off tangent, because I'm famous for kind of, you know, starting off and then going left and right. Can you restate the question? I just want to make sure I'm clear with my response in brief.
Okay, no problem. We were just going back to the Baldwin question, and the Baldwin really quote early on, where it's like not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Okay, so you have to face it. And so, and therefore in this hour, we are coming to face this issue of race. Mm-hmm. And it's many forms. And that's, I'll leave it there. I think you understand.
No, right? Absolutely. And then so the quote that you said the first time actually hit me harder, and I'm gonna explain why a little later, but I want to address the Baldwin quote. Something I've been hearing a lot throughout, you know, the protests and all of the, you know, civil unrest and all of the social action taking place in America is that the change needs to happen, but it needs to start with the group that's being affected the most. And as somebody, you know, as a black male, young black man in law school, you know, having the privilege of going to undergrad, graduating from high school and whatnot, I completely agree with that it must be addressed. And I think that's what the protests were about, you know, raising awareness about an issue. And the reason that I was so excited to hop on this call and get on the panel is because I think that protesting is only step one. And then step two is policy change. You know, everyone has a different lane that they need to, you know, travel in order, like, to fight this fight from all angles. It's not just about protesting. You also want to go from the fight of policy. And that's why this is important. Seeing all of my peers that are in law school that are doing the work, working in public defender's offices, working for nonprofit organizations. And, you know, it's not just to be faced alone. That's why we have allies. You know, I'm African-American. Secretary Slater, you are as well. Ms. Kills, you are as well, but all of us in the call are not. And that's the importance of this time, is that, you know, there's solidarity and unity like never before in America. And I think that, you know, that momentum and that energy needs to be fueled and fed so we can keep going to create lasting impact and change. And that starts with, you know, my colleagues and myself finishing law school, you know, getting these internships, these jobs, and continuing to fight the fight. And I don't want to take too much time, so
No. You were doing quite well, and we appreciate it.
Okay, well, this, and then to the quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes, that really hit me the most, because I imagine, you know, being a black male, you know, it doesn't matter what ethnicity or race my wife belongs to, my kids will, you know, in effect be black. And I'm imagining three young people, however many it will be, looking up at me and saying, like, Dad, what did you do during this time, you know, when all of this is going on? Because this will undoubtedly be in their history books. And I want to be able to say that, you know, I helped to organize with my colleagues and myself, that we actually created long-lasting change, that we protested to raise awareness, that, you know, we got in the halls of Congress, we found our state reps and our state senators, you know, I actually had those tough, courageous conversations to change these policies, defund the police, you name it, and just, you know, work through and get it all passed. So I think that's the most important thing, that we are at a state where, you know, even countries internationally are protesting on our behalf. What's his name? I believe his name is John Boyega. He is a star for Star Wars, one of the new ones. Yeah. And he was in the UK protesting on our behalf for us. And, you know, we're at a point where this is at an all-time high with awareness. Now we just need to follow that awareness with action, because awareness without the action is pointless. It's like a dream without a goal. So now that we're dreaming, we need to put some action items behind it, and, you know, meet those benchmarks that we've set for ourselves in order to create long-lasting change. Because, you know, in the past, America has just had a system where we put Band-Aids on things. Sure. But to create long-lasting impact and change, we have to completely uproot it from where it stands.
Sure. Well, very good. Well, let me just say that I think we have had quite a discussion thus far with all of our panelists. And if it's okay with you, I think it would be good to open it up to the other individuals on the call, on the screen with us, who've been listening, and I'm sure have their own insights to offer based on maybe thoughts that have been stimulated by your comment. And so why don't we check that? And what I'm going to do is see if we have, I don't see anyone that has raised their hand, if you will. But I mean,
I have stuff to speak about if the floor is open.
Okay, is this Jessica?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, so I just kind of want to echo what everyone else said, to thank everyone for participating and giving us this platform. This summer, I'm at the Ohio Public Defender's Death Penalty Department. And that's something that I actually moved to the United States to do. I'm from Canada. So when Jaron had mentioned the international response, I think that it's very important to mention that in Canada, there were multiple protests. We have amazingly problematic our approach to race and conversations about it. For example, up until the 70s, and arguably even now, we have residential schools, which is a huge, I think, point of shame in my community at the very least. And when it comes to my work this summer, a lot of it does boil down, and a lot of our conversations do center on race, not only of the individual who is on death row, but also of the victim or the victims. And that's something I think that is becoming increasingly at the forefront of our conversations, both professionally and amongst my friend groups. People come up to me and they go, well, what do you think about this? How is this going to factor in? Well, we can't use race. I'm going to say what they say. This isn't my view. We can't use race as an excuse. This can't be that. This can't be this, can't be that. It's not everywhere. And I go, but it is. The research proves it. You know, I come from a background of psychology. I was going to do a PhD in clinical forensic psych, and I switched avenues real fast into law. And
that happens.
yeah, it was a 2-year master's, said, please, thank you, goodbye. And I moved on real fast. But it is one of those things that it's well documented. So I think that when it comes to what can we do to change is look at the facts. This isn't an opinion question. This isn't, oh, maybe yes, maybe no. This is something that systematic literature and research shows. Yes, when you do research, you can't say, oh, yes, 100% certainty, this is the reason, this is that. But it's as close as we can really get as a research and as an empirical community. And I really think that that's where my friend group, at least, is going, to individual conversations, having the tough chats. And I think that that's where a lot of it's going to happen. And also more on the broader scale, getting, as somebody else had said, getting a bigger community to talk about it.
Yes.
To get the changes to happen. And I think that that's where a lot of it is. And also just welcoming people with changing views. I have a friend who is, to put it nicely, very conservative. And throughout this, we've had chats where, you know, we've screamed at each other. We've had very tough conversations. And just today, he told me, listen, I'm changing. Give me time, give me steps, give me the opportunity, and I'm going to change. And I think that that also is very powerful, is just keeping welcoming arms open for people who before might have slapped it away.
Yes. Well, Jessica, wonderful comments. And you do know that, Jessica, I'm sorry. You do know that, I'm sure you know George Kendall in our office, who's working in the area that you're interested in. And so we definitely want to make sure that, that you know about our firm's commitment to that kind of work as well. And thank you for bringing this sort of international focus on this. We have referenced it, but you can speak about it firsthand. So very much appreciate it. Let me ask.
Rodney, one interruption. Yeah. We have Clarissa, who's raised her hand.
I was getting ready to go to Clarissa.
Okay, good. Very good.
Hi. I'm very proud that I learned how to use a hand emoji or the hand. I wanted to share, like, someone sometime gave me a fridge magnet that says silence is complicity. And I think this is true, because I think silence has been funneling racism all these years, because how we, after all these decades, we still have racism. So I agree with Brenda when she said that we should look at our privilege and at our bias and be a hand when we can. But also, I would like to invite everyone and to try not to shame, but to raise our voice to every racist joke, every racist word, because I'm sure we're strong enough, like this generation and past generation and future generations, to fight this wave of racism. Like, I think through the last years, we can see the voice increasing and increasing. And it's so sad that I have racist relatives, but now in the group chat, in the family, every time they try to say something racist, even my 10-year-old cousins will be like, no, that's racist. So we're with our voice, we can try to be a conscious for those people who just have racism embedded and they're not thinking through and they're not aware of what their voices are causing to other people.
Well, thank you, Clarissa, and excellent points. And I do think that that there was just this awareness that is there now, and it's in any number of places. And the awareness kind of checks us all. It makes us all a lot more sensitive to things as we see them. And then there is the agent that goes along with that to actually speak up and engage. And so thank you very, very much for your comments in that regard. Let me ask any other, I didn't see any other hands.
We have Morgan.
Okay, Morgan, is this Morgan?
Yes,
Miller?
I'm sorry. I know that I've already taken up a lot of
okay.
space.
Okay.
I just, hearing what some of my other fellows have said just kind of inspired me to share a little bit more about my background. And I think like a lot of this breaks down to communication. Just to open up a bit more, I'm mixed race. My mom is a Black woman, my dad's a white man. And so I think a lot of where we can move forward from here has to do with communication and like having conversations with family members on both sides, with friends who come from different backgrounds. Having conversations like this with people who come from different backgrounds is key. And I think I really agree with a lot that Brenda had to say too, just about like calling out our own privileges. And there are actually implicit bias tests that you can take online for free if you want to kind of challenge, you know, if anyone wants to challenge themselves to kind of see where, because we all have biases. And so I was just kind of inspired by what other people have said to just open up more. But I don't want to take up any more space. So thank you for giving me another opportunity to speak.
Yes. Well, let me, Morgan, thank you. And let me ask, Clarissa, I know that that you're working in Puerto Rico as well. And then we've got Tanya and Ronaldo, who may be with us also. This is a very important effort for the fellowship. It's our Sustained Impact Fellowship. And I think that would be worthy of some expression as well. Could you say a little bit about that? And then maybe if, I think both Tanya and Ronaldo are on the call as well, and we can get them involved.
Correct. So, but just to be sure, what do you want me to tell? Like, what am I doing or how it's impacted by COVID and racism?
Well, why don't you say a little bit about what you're doing? Because I think that in and of itself is unique. And I think the group would appreciate that. And then if something that relates to, you know, specifically the question that's involved here. But I will say that, you know, Puerto Rico has been hit by a number of natural disasters. And there are legitimate questions about whether the response, the assistance has been as forthright as it should have been. So, you know, there are possibly some angles on this question for even addressing the issue that we're trying to address in Puerto Rico with a sustained effort that might relate quite appropriately to the discussion that we're having.
Correct. So first, I want to thank the foundation because they got me, they channeled me to Centro para Puerto Rico. I am working with them because, as you mentioned, they have a lot of natural disasters and then COVID. And there's a lot of funding, private funding available for organizations and community so they can have economic development and help their communities. However, they don't have the requirements for the IRS to qualify as a 501c3. That's like a charitable organization, so they can receive funding. So I'm working with a professor who wants to make guidelines. So it's called fiscal sponsorship. So there could be organizations who qualify in terms of the IRS to receive funding, and at the same time, these organizations can sponsor these projects that are very important for Puerto Rico's development. And right now, it's very well. It helps more with COVID because, again, there's a lot of funding, and because there has been a lot of unemployment and a lot of developments that have been stopped. It's mandatory that these projects are able to receive the funding and can reach out to them, and that they know that they have this available and they have guidelines to do it in a proper manner.
Okay, thank you. And I know that Ronaldo is he's on a call, but Ronaldo, if you could hear us and you could comment.
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So first of all, I want to say this has been really great. Thank you for organizing this. I think it's brought up a very nice conversation about things that are very relevant right now. I'm going to say something not so much about what I'm doing right now. It's more of a question. Hopefully, I may be able to get a better way to address this. So
sure.
Just to give you an idea, right, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, right? In Puerto Rico, you don't necessarily, and tying it up to the whole George Floyd situation and all the protests that sparked, there is not a big African-American community, right? And when I have these conversations with, for example, my family, which many of them have never even left Puerto Rico, about how racism works, why they're tearing down the statues, and all these like vestiges of just people we should not glorify anymore, right? I cannot seem to, I can have the conversations, but I cannot seem to do it in a way that's effective, right? Because in a way, they don't necessarily understand, because even in history class, we're not necessarily taught like what happened in the States, right? And how, whether it be slavery or systemic racism or all these other aspects. Right? So in a way, I want to get anybody's feedback on how to have these types of conversations as to why this is all relevant to people that are not, I don't want to say are blind to the situation, but they just haven't been exposed to a reality. And we are American citizens as well, right? So a lot of them are eventually going to come to the States, and we're going to have these conversations. And I want to maybe get some advice from your side as to how to not just communicate, but to have like an effective conversation where I get my point across about why these things matter, and it's just not whether it's liberals being liberals or you know, however you might want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ronaldo, that is a very important question, and clearly, I think there may be others who would want to offer a comment here, but I would just offer this. You know, I think that the heart of the Black Lives Matter issue is really that very point. I mean, why is it so necessary to say and to have it said that Black Lives Matter? And you see people all the time say, no, that's not what it should be. It should be that all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are some who look at, especially our nation's history, and they say, in order for all lives to matter, you have to come to grips with the thorny question and how it has been denied time and time again that Black lives matter. I mean, that's sort of the core of that discussion. And I'll give you one example, and this, John and I have been talking about this, John Oberdorfer, our president. I was sharing with him, and we had this wonderful discussion about a Frederick Douglass speech that was given in 1852. And it was centered on the 4th of July. And I thought about it when Brenda earlier made reference to Frederick Douglass, and she was saying that, you know, that this quote that was her favorite was, "There can be no progress without struggle." And Douglass, in this speech, which was before the Emancipation Proclamation, was talking about why the 4th of July, from his vantage point, was the most difficult and wrenching of all experiences. Because while it was cloaked in celebratory kinds of events and language and expressions, when he thought about his relative position, it was not something that he could celebrate. Because even with the Declaration of Independence saying that we were going to hold certain truths to be self-evident, meaning beyond denial, beyond question, and that there were certain inalienable rights, which means that there are many more than might be listed, but that among them that we could surely agree on was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When it came to him and all of the people who looked like him, it was not a truth. And it actually went to the very core of how you can argue that that's a truth when it doesn't apply to this group. Now that was 52. I'm going to make this last point and then we can open it. That was 52, before the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. But it was just 5 years before the Supreme Court of the United States actually spoke on that very question about whether Blacks were included in the word citizen and in the phrase we the people and all of the other, pillars of our great experiment. The Chief Justice of no less, Roger Taney, spoke on this question of the place of the Black person in America. And he basically said that they have no rights for which the white man is bound to respect. And you just layer upon layer upon layer of that kind of language, that kind of policy, that kind of expression, and you come to a moment like this that is a reckoning moment. Yeah. And what is so powerful about this moment, I'll say this and I want to open it up, is that you have voices across the US and across the world who are saying, we get it. We get it. And what's really kind of sad about it, is that it took 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a person suffering to sort of put us all on the same page where we could see the same thing. So, Ronaldo, that's my sort of attempt to kind of explain it. And I think even Brenda gets to it when she talks about the three, wheels on a cart and how it takes four, and then all of the parts of the body, it takes the eyes to see, the heart to pump blood, and the hands to clutch, and it takes all of this working together, as it takes all of us working together to really show, I say, the Master's glory. And we're seeing much more of that now in a very, very powerful way. But anyone else who'd like to express themselves on that?
Rodney, excuse me.
Yeah.
We have Tanya, Zora,
Yes.
Zora, and also Brenda had her hand up also.
Okay.
So
Very
Tanya,
good.
Zora, and Brenda, please.
Well, we wanted to hear from Tanya earlier anyway, and I'd noticed that Zora was on the phone. So very, very good. So
And
let's
Rodney,
go.
And
Yes.
Rodney, we have two fellows from Europe,
Oh,
and Lorenzo. It'll be fascinating to get their take as well.
okay. Well, let's do that all in turn if we can.
Okay.
Okay. We'll start with Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to have this call and share all of our great thoughts. I am also a Sustained Impact Fellow. I am working at Ayuda Legal in Puerto Rico, and I'm specifically a Public Policy Fellow, which I think is important right in this time. As part of my job duties, I was assigned to watch a webinar by Ibrahim Kendi, and he wrote this great book about how to be an anti-racist. And I think that one of the most important outtakes that from him is the fact that to truly fight against racism, we must think about policy and try to change policy. And that's specifically what we try to do at Ayuda Legal. And I think this whole situation, the pandemic, and what is happening right now in the United States is informing what we're trying to do here at Ayuda Legal. We are working with recovery efforts from Maria, but we are also trying to work with the pandemic and trying to see how we can help homeless and communities that wouldn't have resources in any other way to be able to afford their rent and to try to fight them from losing their houses. So to answer the question from Reynaldo, I also echo his comment. Within the Latino community, there is a lot of racism, there is a lot of misunderstanding, and I think it is important to first recognize it and understand that even though we do face racism within our community, we have been racist and we have supported that, we have supported racism. And I guess the first thing that we can do is recognize it and just talk about it, bring it on in our houses, bring it out in our communities, just try to inform ourselves and keep reading and keep just trying to change what we see that is wrong. I think that's the best thing that we can do.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. And Zora, I know you've worked on criminal justice reform and that sort of thing, but anything that you'd want to speak to, we'd welcome that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, kind of addressing Ronaldo, was that, so part of my research right now is I do journalism for police brutality, actually. And one of the consent decrees that is still ongoing within the United States and territories is in the Puerto Rico Police Department. And so potentially a way to approach the conversation and to make it more important and sort of be able to draw that connection to other Puerto Ricans when they maybe don't have direct experience with racism and things like that, is by saying, you know, look at all of the people who are being hurt by police brutality and things. You know, it is dominantly Black communities, but it's also, there has been an underserving of individuals who are victims of domestic violence in Puerto Rico. Those people have been under-prosecuted. There have been poor communities, Puerto Rican communities that are dominantly white, Latinos or not, have also been negatively affected by police brutality. So, you know, as many people were saying, it takes all four wheels. People wrongfully think that this is a Black issue, but it's a humanity issue. You know, when people say all lives matter, say, okay, well, right now all lives aren't mattering. So one way to maybe approach that sort of conversation is to point out just how many populations are actually being affected in Puerto Rico, but also with the many country or communities within the United States also, and sort of trying to show that this is not just, you know, we shouldn't put all of the pressure onto one group to try to solve, you know, racism and police brutality and excessive force in our country, because it's affecting all of us and it's a humanitarian issue at this point. And if, unfortunately, because some people won't act unless they think it's affecting them directly, it might be a motivating factor by, you know, saying, well, it does affect you directly. Actually, if you've ever met someone who has lived in a lower income neighborhood, or if you know someone who is a victim of or a survivor of domestic assault, or if you know someone who has had a negative interaction with the police, all of those people are also impacted by this just as fully.
Yes, very good. Thanks, Zora. Thank you. And Mary, why don't I come to you now, if that's okay?
Yeah, hold on. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, thank you.
Great. This is sort of in response to Ronaldo, and also in response, sorry about my voice, and also in response to the call for international perspectives. I am an American, but I spent the past 8 years living in Europe. And the past 3 of those were in rural Ukraine in the Peace Corps. And for those of you who might not know a lot about Ukraine, it is a country with a long and interesting and often tragic history. They were colonized from the 1450s to 1992. They experienced a genocide in the 20th century, and the average monthly salary is now $150. So it's not a place with, and most people, like everyone in my community, subsistence farmed. So it's not a place with a lot of privilege, but it is a place with a lot of racism. And I still, to this day, like most of the people I interact with in my day-to-day life are Ukrainians, and they are deeply racist, mostly anti-Semitic, because that is the historic ethnic minority, and anti-Romani for the same reason, but also anti-Black because of racism and because of American media and what they get from American media, or what they choose to get from American media in Ukraine on TV. And in confronting that, I tried a lot of different things, and I think it's very hard because it's people with no experience. It's a monoculture. It's people with no experience from anyone outside their village. Like, I'm the only foreigner anyone had ever met. And also it's people where I was a wealthy Westerner coming in and telling them their thoughts were wrong, you know? So that's a very difficult thing, or a place of privilege to be in when having those conversations. And then sort of like Zora said, I tried to build those bridges, and like Ukrainians were enslaved for hundreds of years, and all of their heroes are like cultural figures, right? Or freed slaves who went on to be great statesmen or poets, especially. So I'd have like my students read Taras Shevchenko and Frederick Douglass to draw those connections. And sometimes that was successful, but very often it wasn't. And I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on that kind of a situation or any advice. Ronaldo's question.
That's interesting. And it's interesting that you've used the arts, I mean, literature, as you were saying here, but we also see where you can use music to draw understanding and to build bridges. I mean, I think that that both you and Zora have really placed this in a broader context. And a lot of times, just sharing experiences can allow people to find common ground. But there has to be the safe space that we talked about a little earlier. You know, those are the things that come to mind for me. Let me ask, John, I saw you kind of lead up. What do you, was that indicating a thought on this?
No, but I can offer one.
Please.
Yeah, I sort of look at this as, you know, perhaps a great awakening, that the awful acts of police brutality, racial injustice, are leading us to what is really, to me, the most impregnable part of it, which is systemic racism, which, you know, flows through the veins of, you know, probably everybody in one way or another, all over the world. And how do you overcome that so that you know, people of all races can walk the streets, drive the car, be, you know, assured of safety, be assured of security, you know, have an equal shot before the law, and not view the law as the predator. So, you know, I hope that these last 4 weeks and more are awakening a lot of the population. As somebody mentioned, a conservative friend, you to be open, and people are hearing things that they hadn't heard before. I have to put myself in the category of never really appreciating what Juneteenth was, what it meant. And I think that, a lot of African Americans, told me, well, we've been celebrating that for years. And I think that the occasion this year was that a lot of white Americans, it was a way to help wake up a lot of white Americans and to move them forward. So, I'm hopeful. I don't, there's really no other way to be. And I think this continuing conversation, I don't by any means want to cut it off at all, is so invigorating and so positive. I'd love to hear from some more people who are on the phone who haven't had a chance to speak. I know we have 2 Europeans. I know we have someone from Texas who is working on education there, has worked on it for years.
Right.
Be wonderful to hear even more perspective.
And Rodney, we have hands raised from Sadev and Linda, and I think John wanted to hear from Lorenzo also.
Okay. Well, let's go with Sadev first, and then we'll go to Lorenzo, and then to you after that, Brenda, if that's okay. Okay. Sadev?
And Catherine.
Oh, Catherine, okay.
Thank you, Secretary Slater, and all the panelists so far. It's been a really enriching discussion. So I come from the technology policy realm, which I think to a lot of folks sometimes feels abstracted away from issues of systemic racism and police brutality and some of the things that are top of mind at the moment. And I work for a public interest technology policy group that among the things we work on is the issue of algorithmic bias. And I wanted to kind of just inject this technology perspective into the conversation, because I think when we have these conversations, it's important to pay attention to the systems that we're building. And this is sometimes an even trickier issue because there's not necessarily intent involved. These are just systems, and they're designed in a way that doesn't require any kind of racist intent, but the way they function sometimes is to embed racism. For example, there was an issue in the New York Times yesterday that some of you may have read of a Black man in Detroit, and a camera in a Shinola store basically misidentified him with someone else. And they found that the system had performed incorrectly, but the man had to undergo significant humiliation to get through that process, possibly undergo expensive legal fees and exonerated. And it could be a very kind of traumatizing event. And the reason for the system malfunctioning is that it just so happens that a lot of the data on which these algorithms are trained disproportionately kind of include may disproportionately not include, for example, the faces of people of color or certain races or genders. And therefore, the system's just not as good at recognizing or correctly identifying certain types of folks. So I guess the question here is, those types of systems, as well as other systems that we're deploying in criminal sentencing contexts, for example, which help us make decisions on when certain prisoners are released versus others. Those also rely on historical data, which is tainted by the history of systemic racism. And when we deploy these systems without thinking through the consequences or thinking through, the costs and benefits, we may end up kind of embedding some of the same old disparities that we've had for so long. So I just wanted to kind of inject this voice to remind folks that technology policy issues, while they seem kind of abstracted away, are very much relevant to this conversation as well. And I hope that more awareness is kind of raised about them.
Yes. Sadev, thank you for bringing that forth, because as you know, through artificial intelligence, we are giving over much more of the decision-making process to machines. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a personal interface. I mean, they have to be programmed and that sort of thing, but the data, I mean, it really, it sends chills down your spine, you know, when you think about some of that. And facial recognition technology, I mean, it's just there. So thank you for bringing that to the discussion. We very much appreciate it. Thank you. Lorenzo, let me come to you, and then Brenda, and then Catherine.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening from Italy. All the panelists were super interested, so they keep me awake really well. So how can I add to this conversation? Unfortunately, I've never been to the US, at least not yet. I hope to join your country in September, but the COVID probably postponed my plans. Hope to be better there in January. At least my Italian experience, of course, in Italy, racism is not such a big issue, at least not until some years ago. For example, in the 90s, we received thousands, hundreds of thousands of immigrants, for example, from Albania and Romania after the falling of communist regimes. And actually, and at least in the history book, in the Italian history book, they wrote that there was quite a good welcome acceptance of these people. Although, of course, it's not a racial issue because Albanians have the same skin color. But now I can see that something changed also in the Italian society. I think above all for economic reason, because after the financial crisis, etc., Italy is struggling to get out from this crisis. Now with COVID, it will be probably even worse. And from my point of view, I would say that now it's above all a matter of surviving. It's not about colors of the skin. It's just now it's really successful, the propaganda of they're stealing our jobs. And the problem, for example, in Italy is that Italians, like many other Europeans, they have a really huge problem with the misperception of the issues of our society. If you ask to Italians, what's the percentage of immigrants, of black people in the world population, they will say, according to some surveys, 15%, 20%. The truth is barely above 5%. So I really don't know how to stop racism, but I know how to maybe stop some of the surging of this feeling, because, for example, if we look at the social media, Facebook, it's full of video that fake news of boost are just trying to reproduce as much as possible. And this is having a huge impact also from political point of view. We are in Italy now, we have almost, let's say, a neo-fascist party that, according to the surveys, is at almost 14%. And the right-wing Liga Nord with Mr. Salvini is still the first party, although it's a bit declining thanks to the COVID. That's one of the few positive things of these pandemics. And the problem is that, for example, in the Italian case, people are not fact-checking many of the news that they are reading. And then, for example, there is a video of black people destroying a car. It had, I think, 3 million of sharings. And then after 3 weeks, they discovered that it was just a part of a movie, but after 3 weeks. So during these weeks, many people said, oh, these black people are doing bad. They just came here to steal our job, destroy our cars, etc. And people that traditionally are not racist, they start to think that maybe that's not a good solution to host them. They should stay at home and not coming to Italy. So I think that if we are not trying to stop the spreading of these fake news, also traditional society like the Italian, that they don't have this huge program, at least from the historical point of view, like in the United States, about racism, etc., I think this virus will spread also around us even more than in the past.
Thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you for sharing some of the specifics about your country and the issue of immigration. As you know, that's becoming a sort of flashpoint, really globally. And I think, and I mean, this probably deserves a full hour in and of itself, but it could be that some of the emotional response to what's happening in the U.S. might relate to people being very sensitive to those concerns in other places around the globe, and actually speaking out to this as being sort of a symptomatic type experience or an example of something that they are concerned about that's festering locally as well. So I don't think that that's something that's totally off off the point. But you for sharing your thoughts. And I will say this, and I do think that that's why the U.S. and the example that it's really sought to represent as this great experiment with democracy and with the rights of all people, I do think that it's so important, not only for the U.S. as we grapple with the promise and the reality, but I think it's good for the global society as well, as people look to examples to see how you manage these dynamics. And I just want us to be that beacon. I want us to be that light. But let me go to Catherine, and well, Brenda first, and then we'll go to Catherine. I'm sorry.
And excuse me, just 1 minute. Walesa also would like to make a comment.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Who was it?
Walesa or Walesa?
Oh,
I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Okay, so Brenda, we'll go with you first. I think you were next, and then Catherine, and then Melissa, right?
Melissa.
Later, if you need someone else to go first, I've already been heard. I don't mind going last.
Okay, that's fine. Well, then maybe you want to go with Catherine. Are you ready? Was it Catherine?
Yeah, maybe is she still on?
Well, maybe we'll go back to Catherine, but Melissa Ho.
Greetings from Paris. Thank you very much for this very inspiring conversation. If I may share with you two perspectives, maybe two very French perspectives on this. Because about the conversation that we just have this evening, like on one part, it seems that we question like our place today in the current society, but also how we deal with the history. I'm from the French Overseas Territories. I have lived in the French island in the Caribbean, but also in French Guiana, which is a territory in South America. And there we have like this mixing of population due to many to history and to the history of slavery. And I don't know if like any of you are familiar with the negritude movement in the French literature. It was a movement who's like one of the main author of it was Aimé Césaire, and he questioned like the place of Black people in the society, and the aim of this movement was to raise awareness on to raise consciousness on Black people. And it seems that like this movement started like 1 century ago. It seems that it is a never-ending movement, and that us, new generation, we still question this because on the French island, It seems that we are far away from Europe, but also from the US and from the rest of the world. But the question of like the name of streets, the statues, we have those same questions. And each year at the time of commemoration of slavery, we do question this strongly. And there's often this like confusion, where do we belong? Do we belong to Europe? Do we belong to France? Do we actually belong to Africa? Or is it a mix of Africa, Asia, Caribbean, South America, or this mix of history together? From my point of view, and of my personal history, I think that it's a combination of all of this, but also it's also part of raising those questions at the national level, which means for us at the French national level, but also at the European level, because we're also part of the European Union. But and also to collect this with what I wanted to say in the second place, is that what struck me is that you mentioned during this conversation that this was a safe place. And I must admit that in France, unfortunately, we have not arrived at that stage. And it's a conversation that I've never had in university, for example. Wow. Not even with a close group of friends. Maybe with some friends like me from the Caribbean. But sometimes it just seems for me that we don't push this conversation that far. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And it was like, again, like, thank you for, especially I was very touched by what Brenda has said earlier. Like, this is like something that I very echo to. In places that I've been, in university, but also in workplace, I've never seen someone like me. And it's something that sometimes it was hard for me to deal with, because I didn't know where I belong, if I was like, have enough skills to be there, or it was just because I was there just because I have the chance to have this opportunity. And I think that one of the answers that I've found so far is that mentorship matter, as you mentioned. And it's because that some people, they show me no matter where you're from, it's possible to achieve this, that I've arrived so far. But this is like, if I'm thinking about like people from Guadeloupe, for example, an island where I live, like I know that some people did not have the opportunity that I had, simply because it was like opportunity were not presented at them. And I think that for our generation, it's important to talk about our story, to share our background, and to maybe try to inspire like even one person. And I think that to inspire one person, this makes a big difference, actually. So thank you again for this talk tonight.
Yes. Well, thank you, Alyssa. And you should know that Brenda is smiling, and I'm going to go immediately to her, if I may, because I think the two of you made just a wonderful connection here.
I loved it. She literally I was going to say, but I didn't. I know everyone's tired, and this is really helpful in this deep conversation, but I didn't want to leave, or I didn't feel comfortable leaving this conversation without leaving you all with one thought, at least for me, because I won't speak again, so everybody can be heard. But we spoke a lot about awareness and being active. And I do believe that the death of George Floyd sparked international awareness, and it made that go up. However, it's really, really, really hard for me to believe that the people in the United States that contribute to our democracy and that can actually invoke change are not aware. I think that there's more issue of ignoring it. So an example of this is I went to the protest. I've been to a couple of protests, and it feels good and it's great. And then you look up and you see someone taking a picture, and they're like, hi, and they're with their friends, and everyone's drinking, and that's fun because we're spreading awareness, and we're also doing something great, and we're happy, and it ends up on social media, and that's where it stops. And we're preaching to the choir, at least for American citizens who are here, and we do learn in our textbooks that racism and slavery and discrimination for other groups of minorities and underrepresented people exist. It stops at just awareness. We already know. I think that with this statement, I like to charge everyone on this call to not just make people aware of what's going on, but don't allow them to ignore it. And that may be what Walissa, it may be in the form of what Walissa said, or it could be in the form of what Clarissa said, that rhymes, but we don't want to just leave it there. And I think that, for example, I'll give you another example. One of my family members, she's 22 years old, she's my sister. She just experienced what discrimination based on race actually feels like. We went to a beach trip and there was a mistake about a group of Black women. So the woman that they thought we were, they had threw up at the bar. It wasn't anything crazy, but they just threw up. It wasn't a wild thing, they just threw up. And we were mistaken for those people, and it led to us being put out, and I'll spare y'all the details. But the only thing that happened there was that people put their phones up. So people put their phones up and they just recorded. No one stepped in and said, hey, you can't do this. I bet you that no one that was sitting there that wasn't involved in this situation wrote a letter to say, hey, I was a patron at this restaurant and I saw something happen. And I think that's where the awareness stops, and we start to say, you cannot ignore this because I will not let you, because it doesn't just affect these particular people, it affects more than that person. So with that said, I like to charge the people who are here, who are aware, to stop letting people ignore it, and the people who are just knowing what's going on. For example, we know that Black people and a lot of minorities throughout history, as far as like Henry Osawa Tanner, that was a famous artist, they would go to places like France so they wouldn't have to experience the same amount of discrimination or racial discrimination that they did here. So yes, awareness internationally, but we won't allow you to ignore it here. And that's my charge, and I'm done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Very good. So I think, have we heard from everyone pretty much? I think we have. Look, Rick, I see you here, and you've been such a leader in our with the program, and you know, and just doing wonderful things. Why don't you? And by the way, you all should know that we actually had a recent call within our firm where there was a communication about things that we were going to do as a firm. And a number of us were on it, but Rick actually did one of the most detailed, in the moment expressions about the depth and breadth of the fellowship program, the fellows program, and all that you represent. And I think it would just be great to hear from him, because he was saying to everyone in the firm, we're already doing things. Now, Brenda, you've challenged us to do more, not taking away from that point, but I wanted to just lift that up as an example of Rick talking about what you represent. And with this number now at 27, representing more than 270 over the life of the program, this is a powerful community. So Rick, let me just come to you.
Well, thank you very much, Rodney, and I appreciate the shout out. You know, in my neighborhood right now, people are putting up signs with various slogans that relate to the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of my neighbors has one that I really was struck with, and it's sort of an answer to the Ellison quote, the Baldwin quote that you gave. And it's by Angela Davis, who, you know, people can have different opinions about, but her statement was, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And I thought that was a very powerful statement. What you think can't be changed one day, it turns out the next day you can. I think this is a moment, hopefully, that is like that. You know, the Squire Patton Boggs Foundation was founded on a case that John Oberdorfer ran that took 20 years to complete. You know, litigation, you think of something that takes a year, maybe it takes 2 or 3. That case took 20 years and persistence by John and a team of people at the firm and other places. and ultimately had a successful result. And then the legal fees that we received from that case were contributed to start the foundation. And when I look at what that foundation has accomplished in the last 20 years, and I look at the array of diverse people who are working in so many diverse fields and so many different important and relevant issues, it really makes me optimistic that this is a time when change is possible. And I just charge everybody, that's an echo Brenda, let's change what we can't accept.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Rick. And maybe a way to sort of close it out would be to turn to John, because Rick was just so appropriate in acknowledging that while we're celebrating 20 years of the existence of the foundation, the effort that really made the foundation possible was a 20-year effort in and of itself. And John was at the center of that. And so, John, maybe I can come to you, and if we're comfortable, we might just use your comments as the closing for our session today, a very wonderful session. And I think we've all found it a safe space, and also a safe place too. It's said that place is space plus memories, and I think we will all remember for a long time what the comments today have caused us to not only think but also feel. And so, with that, John, let me just come to you if I can.
Sure, Rodney. Thank you, and thank you, Rick, and thank all of the fellows for their contributions, their participation, their input tonight. It's been marvelous, so positive. I think I would differ maybe at my peril a little bit with Brenda by saying that, you know, we're not preaching to the choir when we have these conversations. I think that I've seen conversations like this reach people who, you know, sort of knew but hadn't focused. And when they heard personal experiences of police harassment or worse from the lips of people they worked with, that was a different level of consciousness. And I'm thinking of a conversation that Barbara and I had with some of our colleagues in another context. And one of the white male Americans from Eastern Washington was, you know, just shaken, and has spent the intervening time talking to his family about what he heard, and, you know, maybe was subconsciously aware of, but not fully consciously aware of, and, you know, and what can he do, and that sort of thing. So I think it is much more than speaking to the choir, and I think there's a large group that is, you know, if their levels of consciousness moving up, and I think that this conversation and others that I hope this will spawn among you with us, otherwise will continue to have a positive effect. And certainly watching the screen tonight and looking at the breadth of the people who are in this fellowship program this year, our 2020 class, just, you know, makes me, and I'm sure all of us with the foundation, you know, have so much pride, so much appreciation for, you know, the little we can do to help facilitate your careers in public service, in pro bono work, in public interest work, and to bring you together from California to Italy and France, you know, with people with just much different personal experiences, aspirations, directions, and you know, to me, it's the case that Rick was talking about was a employment discrimination case here in Washington on behalf of African American construction workers against a union. So this is back a ways, a union which would not let African Americans into the union without going through all kinds of hurdles and barriers and everything like that. And I had a conversation about it maybe 15 years after it was over. And a friend, African-American friend, asked me, he says, what do you think that case was about? And I said, oh, it was about employment opportunities, economic opportunities. He said, no, it wasn't. It was about human dignity. Each one of those men was striving for his recognition of his human dignity. And I think that underneath all of what we're talking about, that is the basic drive of all of us, and to be, free of aspersions, to be able to attain the promises of the Declaration of Independence. And it's all about human dignity. So I want to thank you all. Rodney, you were extraordinary, unbelievable. And I've seen you be unbelievable before, and you were right up with your unbelievables tonight. So a round of applause to you and to all participants, and Barbara, Janet, thank you so much for making this possible. I kept thinking all the way through it, if I was running the Zoom video, what would have happened after maybe not even before the first minute. It's been a pleasure. It's been, just something we're going to have to reflect on and figure out where we're going next. We certainly invite everyone in the fellowship to think about what we, the foundation, should be doing. Should we be having another conversation? Should we, we just, obviously we're turning a page and trying to figure out with the rest of the world what we can contribute and affect and do in the coming months. So with that, it's back to you, Rodney and Barbara and Janet. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And all of you who are on the line, particularly those, it's midnight in Europe, right? It's quite late in Europe. So it's great to have you with us. And I think that your presence and participation in this conversation just underscores for me why we have a fellowship in Europe. So thank you for being a part of this fellowship program. It really is important.
Yes. And John, thank you. And clearly, my job was very easy because all we had to do was to hear from Morgan and Brenda, Mercedes and Jaron and Ian. And then that got us started because they laid it out very, very well. And all of their cohorts then chimed in. And I can tell you that we as a firm are just so very, 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 very proud of all of you. And I think because of your voices today, you've helped us to see things a little clearer, to really just know what a great idea it was, lo these 20 years ago, to establish the foundation and to come forth with the Fellows Program. And if I may, what I'd like to do is just close with this, which I think is an important point, because it helps us wherever we sit, wherever we stand. And this was Thoreau's quote about it matters not so much what you look at, but what you see. And because of the insights that we collectively have brought to the discussion, I think we all conclude this experience seeing better, understanding better, and being more committed ourselves individually and collectively to not only be the change, but to make it happen as well. So thank you.